The Chief Supreme Court Justice of Kentucky is surveying judges across the state to see if he should recommend opening up child protection courts.
Kentucky's one of 21 states that still close child protection proceedings, but there's a growing movement here to open them up after the Inspector General of Kentucky, in this report, documented widespread abuses within the child protection system. Tonight, we continue our 3-year-long investigation of Kentucky CPS.
Please welcome our good friend, Senator Nancy Schaefer.
Thank you, dear Phyllis, and thank you to all of you. I have served in the Georgia State Senate for 4 years. One of my greatest pleasures, other than my sonogram bill, was getting the resolution passed to stop the North American Union. However, for 4 years, I have been confronted with families struggling to remove their children from the clutches of Child Protective Services. I wrote a scathing report last year on the corruption in Child Protective Services, and an update and copies are out on the table. The Department of Child Protective Services has become a protected empire built on taking children and separating families. This is not to say that there are not those children who do need to be removed from wretched situations and need protection. However, my report is concerned with the children and parents caught up in legal kidnapping. Having worked with probably 300 cases statewide and hundreds across the country, and in nearly every state, I am convinced there is no accountability in Child Protective Services. The Adoption and the Safe Families Act, set in motion first in 1974 by Walter Mondale and later in 1997 by President Bill Clinton, offered cash bonuses to the states for every child they adopted out of foster care. Some counties often offer $4,000 to $6,000 bonus for each child adopted out to strangers, and an additional $2,000 for a special needs child. Employees work to keep the federal dollars flowing. The National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect in 1998 reported that 6 times more children died in foster care than in the general public, and that once removed to official safety, these children are far more likely to suffer abuse, including sexual molestation, than in the general population. Think what that number is today, 10 years later. Child Protective Services seizes children using the very system that is paid for by the taxpayer, who actually believes it is used to protect abused and neglected children. The bureaucracy of workers benefit financially by a system that converts children into cash while destroying their families and their lives.
And it's all driven by money. All of the taking of the children that is going on right now.
Is Child Protective Services just an official government kidnapping ring?
Basically, yes.
CPS is the agency that's charged with protecting children.
Its investigators and caseworkers make decisions that impact the lives of thousands of Texas families.
So who are the people making these life-changing decisions?
CBS 42 investigative reporter Nancy Wilson looked into the backgrounds of child welfare workers. What she found may surprise you.
Assault, burglary, DWI, theft, domestic violence, indecent exposure, prostitution, possession of cocaine and marijuana, and selling alcohol to minors. What do all of these crimes have in common? They are just some of the crimes committed by people who work for the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. That's right, the agency in charge of protecting Texas children. We found more than 370 employees have a criminal background. Some have direct contact with foster kids. David Mendoza pled guilty to assault with bodily injury to a family member and violating a protective order. He's a CPS supervisor in El Paso. Richard Landon was arrested for indecent exposure in 1997, and in 1994 he was arrested for prostitution after soliciting an undercover cop. He also works for the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services.
The removal of more than 400 children from the FLDS ranch in West Texas has put Child Protective Services under the microscope.
That case has led others to wonder if they could do that to FLDS children. Can CPS do that to my children?
CBS 42 investigative reporter Nancy Wilson shows us one family who says the same thing happened to them, and 8 years later, they're still trying to clear their names.
And you take 13 kids.
Gates was shocked to find CPS workers in his home uninvited.
That opened my eyes to a whole new way of government.
Especially when CPS refused to leave.
In my being naive, I really kind of fell back on this Fourth Amendment thing. You know, you're kind of raised that you had protection in the home.
Gates said it didn't matter.
At the end of that day, 6 deputies and 5 CPS officials came into our house and removed all 13 children in emergency taking.
One by one, all 13 of the Gates children were removed from their homes, loaded into a paddy wagon, and taken to foster homes.
That's wrong.
It was done without a court order under what's called an emergency removal. The law allows it only when there's a danger to the physical health and safety of a child and the need for removal is necessary. What was the danger?
The reason they later on said in court is, well, we felt Mr. Gates was uncooperative. And his uncooperativeness with us put the children at risk.
First thing Monday morning, the Gates were in court. The judge ordered CPS to return the children immediately, but to be safe, the judge ordered an independent evaluation.
Psychologist Jay Bevan conducted the home study. He wrote a glowing report, concluding with, "I've never said this about anyone I've ever evaluated. I admire the Gates. I would not hesitate to place my own children in their care." According to court records, CPS's response was both the department and CASA have found Dr. Bevan's report disappointing.
You would think they'd be saying, you know what, this is great. We don't need to be involved here. Let us go on to somewhere else where there is some real issues. But instead, they say, well, we're disappointed. And they have just continued to dig in their heels.
Even though the court dismissed the case against the Gates, CPS continues to classify them as child abusers in the state's central registry.
They said, well, we felt that you emotionally abused this one child, and since all the kids saw that, that's 13 counts of abuse on those children. And because your wife didn't stop it, that's 13 counts of emotional abuse from her.
The Gates were never charged with any crime. They are guilty based solely on the opinion of CPS. They say such a system is unconstitutional.
They spent the last 8 years and $175,000 trying to get their names removed from the registry. And like them, a number of parents have appealed. They've increased 265% in the past 2 years. Now, it can be a lengthy and sometimes expensive process, but the Gates say it's worth it to clear their name.
So I took him out of that school and I put him in another school. Everything was fine for a while until they got the records from the other school. Then the same thing happened. They started calling me at work saying, Vincent won't sit still, you need to come in and have a meeting. And again, I went to the meeting and they said, you have to put your son on Ritalin or we'll put him in a special school. I took him out of that school and put him in another school, Sunnyvale. And that is where they called CPS, Child Protective Services, and when I was at work, they took my son out of daycare and they put him in an institution. When I got home from work, there was a card on my door from a police officer, and it said, please call me regarding your son.
The Division of Family Services was originally set up to protect children, but I don't see that happening anymore. They're used as a way for people to report one another, for children to even report their parents. Instead of helping children, I see them going into homes, pulling these kids out of homes so that they can put them on drugs.
I called the Sunnyvale Police Department, and then immediately I picked up the phone to call my mother. And the next thing I know, the police officer just came right through my door without even knocking or anything. He grabbed the phone away from me. He says, you're not calling anyone. And he slammed me down. I thought, this guy's crazy. And so I started crawling away from him, and he grabbed my ankles so hard and pulled me back that I still have his fingerprints in my ankles to this day.
The teacher was telling me that he wasn't learning the way he should be learning, that he wouldn't learn unless I opted for the medication, because the medication would help him learn. I unfortunately at that point kind of bowed down to the school and what they were saying and the pressure they were putting on me, and I, went with the drugs.
Approximately 10% of boys from ages 6 through 12 or so are taking psychotropic medication, and this is just an appalling statistic to me as a parent and as a physician.
In the early 90s, there was a huge spike in children being diagnosed ADHD and subsequently being put on Ritalin. At that time, several things happened. The federal government awarded schools more money based upon more children being diagnosed ADHD. And also for low-income families, if a child was diagnosed ADHD and put on Ritalin, the family received a lot more money monthly.
Cash bonuses to the states for every child they adopted out of foster care.
More money based upon more children being diagnosed ADHD.
Cash bonuses to the states for every child they adopted out of foster care.
It's frightening how easy it is for children to be diagnosed. They are being diagnosed by school teachers and by school personnel of all types in all school districts across the country.
Remember the case of Vanessa Shanks, who had her kids taken away, and when she fought back, saw her relatives' kids taken away, and when she won her appeal, saw her attorney's child taken away? These former CPS workers say that kind of retaliatory power is common, and in this secretive one-side system, they can take your kids away right now if they want to and get away with it.